Other South African contingents, including 5 batteries of the South African Heavy Artillery, the South African Medical Corps, the South African Signal Company, and the Railways and Trades Companies, also saw service in the Western Front. South African troops also served in Palestine in the course of the campaign against Turkey. A brigade of field artillery was deployed there in the summer of 1916, together with the 1st Battalion Cape Corps, both of which were transferred from East Africa. The 1st Battalion Cape Corps distinguished itself at the Battle of Square Hill in September 1918. Within 2 decades, the Second World War broke out in September 1939. Once again, with the same political divisions as that of 1914, South Africa entered the fray on the side of the Allies. In February 1940, the active citizen force was reorganized on a completely voluntary basis due to the vociferous South African opposition to the country's entry into the war. Those who took the Africa Service Oath in March 1940 committed themselves to serve anywhere on the African continent and wore an orange shoulder flash. South Africa played a significant role in the struggle against the German-Italian Axis in Africa. The 1st South African Division was instrumental in driving Italy from its East African colonies of Abyssinia and Somaliland, with relatively few casualties of 270 men, of whom 73 were killed. In one major aspect, the Abyssinian campaign had been a misleading initiation into battle for the South African forces. The campaign was rapid, of only 5 months' duration, with victories achieved against a largely irresolute and dispirited enemy. In an unbroken series of defeats, the Italians lost 30 generals, 170,000 troops, 42 tanks, and 103 guns, inflicted by an enemy who were outnumbered 3-1. In North Africa, where the 1st Division was joined by the 2nd South African Division, the South Africans, forming part of the British 8th Army, found themselves up against a highly efficient and resolute enemy in the Axis forces, led by General, later Field Marshal, Erwin Rommel. The 1st Division was committed to Operation Crusader, in which the 8th Army endeavoured to relieve the beleaguered garrison at Tobruk. In the course of the offensive, the 5th South African Brigade was overrun by German armour on the 23rd of November 1941 at Sidi Rezegh. Less than half the brigade survived. The 2nd Division, having prepared defensive positions at El Alamein, moved to the Egyptian-Libyan frontier, and in December 1941, January 1942, forced the Axis forces at Bardia, Solim and Halfaya to surrender. Both divisions then moved to Gazala, a defensive line immediately west of Tobruk. The 1st Division, under the command of Major General Dan Pienaar, held the coastal sector, while the 2nd Division, under Major General H.B. Klopper, took up positions in Tobruk itself. By mid-June 1942, the Axis forces broke through the Gazala line and forced the 8th Army to withdraw to Egypt. The 2nd Division was surrounded at Tobruk and as a result lost 10,722 men as prisoners of war to the Axis. The 1st Division withdrew to the Alamein line, where it played a leading role in the 2 battles of El Alamein which followed. The first battle commenced on the 1st of July 1942, when the might of the German armour was hurled at the El Alamein defences. The defence held and the Axis forces withdrew. The second battle commenced on the 23rd of October 1942, when the 8th Army launched a major offensive against the Axis forces. This battle, considered to be a turning point in the Allied fortunes during the war, resulted in the repulse of the Axis forces from Egypt and Libya. Fighter and bomber squadrons of the South African Air Force, as part of the Desert Air Force, played a critical role in achieving air superiority and victory in Africa. The ships of the South African naval forces patrolling the Cape Sea route and the Mediterranean were equally vital in the achievement of naval superiority over the enemy. South African non-divisional troops such as the South African Engineer Corps and Tank Corps were also vital to the Allied victory in Africa and continued serving in the North African theatre until Axis resistance collapsed there in April 1943. Between June and November 1942, the 7th South African Brigade, under the command of Brigadier G.T. Seneschal, took part in the British invasion of Madagascar, then under the control of Vichy France, and facing the threat of capture by the Japanese who had penetrated the Indian Ocean. The Vichy forces surrendered on the 2nd of March 1942, following the penetration of the southern half of the island. South African casualties numbered only 18, the result of tropical diseases. In January 1943, a new oath, the General Service Oath, was introduced to enable those who wished to volunteer for service anywhere in the world. The 6th South African Armoured Division was formed under the command of Major General W.H.E. Poole for service in German-occupied Italy. In April 1944, the division landed in Italy and initially, under the command of the British Eighth Army, became involved in the fierce Battle of Monte Cassino. After the fall of Rome in June 1944, the South Africans spearheaded the Allied advance northwards, as the Germans staged a fighting withdrawal to prepare defensive lines in the rear. Eventually, in August 1944, the 6th Division entered Florence in the vanguard of the Allied advance. In September 1944, the division came under the command of the United States Fifth Army and became heavily involved in breaking the Gothic line beyond Florence. The slow advance involved fighting many ferocious battles against a determined and stubborn enemy. The South Africans continued fighting in the Po Valley and ended its campaign near the town of Finale. Throughout the campaign, the Germans demolished and blocked tunnels, roads, mountain passes and bridges with the highest degree of expertise, and the role of the South African Engineer Corps became indispensable to the Allied progress. The South African Air Force squadrons played a dominant role in the maintenance of Allied air support. No. 2 South African Air Force Wing, operating from Italy, played an important role in the hazardous supply drop to the beleaguered Polish forces in the Warsaw Uprising in August 1944. The end of the Second World War witnessed the beginning of the Cold War, with the imposition of the Iron Curtain across Europe by the Soviet Union. In 1948, the Soviet Union initiated a strategic attempt to expel the Western powers from West Berlin by cutting the overland communication between West Berlin and West Germany, thus requiring all supplies to be airlifted into the city. The South African Air Force was called upon to contribute to the year-long Anglo-American airlift to West Berlin by providing 20 air crews for a daily shuttle service which flew no less than 1,240 missions in Royal Air Force Dakotas out of the German city of Lübeck during the airlift. In June 1950, South Korea was invaded by Communist North Korea, and the United Nations requested its member states to intervene militarily in support of the South Koreans. South Africa readily offered the services of No. 2 Squadron South African Air Force, which was gratefully accepted. The squadron, equipped with F-51 Mustangs and later by F-86 Sabres, was mainly involved in ground strike operations. By the end of hostilities in 1953, the squadron had flown 12,405 sorties. The squadron's members were awarded the prestigious Unit Citation from the President of the United States of America. South Africans who gave their lives in the First World War lie in cemeteries throughout Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. The names of the missing on the Western Front are inscribed on the monument to the missing of the Somme at Thiepval and on the Menin Gate at Ypres. Although South Africans had fought in many battles on several other fronts, Delverwood was chosen as the official national memorial site because of the huge impact that the battle had had on the consciousness of the South African people. South African dead of the Second World War lie predominantly in the war cemeteries at Acroma, Tobruk, El Alamein, Castiglione, Florence, and Bolsino. South African Air Force men who died in the raid on Warsaw are buried in the Krakow, Rakovice, and Belgrade war cemeteries. The names of the missing are inscribed on the Alamein and Malta memorials.